The legend becomes reality. The Zephrani Empire had ruled their corner of the galaxy for 10,000 cycles, and in all that time, they had never encountered a species they couldn't either subjugate or eliminate. Their crystalline bodies shimmered with an inner light that matched their sense of superiority, and their telepathic abilities made them formidable opponents in both diplomacy and warfare. They were, in their own estimation, the pinnacle of evolution. So when Ambassador Korthax entered the Grand Assembly Hall with reports of unusual activity in the Outer Rim territories, most of the council members barely flickered their attention crystals in his direction. The hall itself was a monument to Zephrani achievement, a massive dome of living crystal that resonated with the collective thoughts of thousands of their kind. Each facet caught and reflected the light of their home star, creating a symphony of colors that would have been breathtaking to any species capable of appreciating it. Korthax stood at the center of the hall, his usually bright amber form dulled with concern. The old ambassador had served the Empire for 300 cycles, and he had learned to trust his instincts. Something was terribly wrong in the outer territories, and the council's dismissive attitude only heightened his anxiety. "Honored members of the council," Korthax began, his thoughts projecting clearly through the crystalline network that connected all Zephrani minds. "I bring urgent news from our monitoring stations. Several of our automated mining facilities have gone silent. The last transmission spoke of unknown vessels appearing without warning, ships that don't match any known configuration in our databases. High Counselor Zerath, whose form gleamed with the deep purple of authority, barely shifted on his floating throne. Pirates, most likely. Or perhaps those insufferable Corvani trying to test our borders again. Send a patrol ship to investigate and be done with it." But Korthax persisted, something that was almost unheard of in their rigid society. "With respect, High Counselor, the sensor readings are unlike anything we've encountered. These ships appear to use a form of faster-than-light travel that doesn't create the usual subspace ripples. They simply appear." A ripple of amusement passed through the council chamber. Counselor Viridian, her form a striking emerald green, projected her thoughts with barely concealed condescension. "Ambassador, you're not suggesting that these are the mythical humans from the old archives? Those stories are nothing more than cautionary tales told to newly formed crystallites." The mention of humans caused a brief pause in the chamber's harmonic resonance. Every Zephrani knew the stories passed down through generations of memory crystals. Tales of a species from a distant world called Earth, beings of flesh and bone who had supposedly achieved spaceflight despite their primitive biology. The stories spoke of their chaotic nature, their ability to survive in conditions that would destroy most civilized species, and their peculiar habit of forming emotional bonds with anything, including their machines. Korthax's form brightened with determination. "I've accessed the restricted archives, counselors. The descriptions match. Bipedal forms in environmental suits, ships held together with what appears to be improvised repairs, and most tellingly, they seem to communicate using electromagnetic waves rather than proper telepathic channels." High Counselor Zerath's form darkened to almost black, a sign of extreme displeasure. "You accessed restricted archives without permission? Those records were sealed for good reason, Ambassador. They contain nothing but the ravings of explorers who ventured too far into dead space and returned with their minds fractured." The argument might have continued for cycles, as debates often did in the Zephrani Council, but it was interrupted by an emergency transmission that burst through their communications network with alarming urgency. Every crystal in the chamber resonated with the panic of the message. "Mining Station 77 Alpha is under attack. Unknown vessels have emerged from nowhere. They're not responding to our surrender protocols. By the first light, they're boarding us. They walk on two legs, they're covered in fabric and metal, The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving only the echo of terror in the telepathic network. For the first time in centuries, the Grand Assembly Hall fell completely silent. High Counselor Zerath recovered first, his form blazing with indignation. "Impossible. No species would dare attack the Zephrani Empire directly. We are the supreme power in this sector. Our technology is unmatched, our fleet invincible." But even as he spoke, more emergency transmissions began flooding in. Mining stations, research outposts, and automated defense platforms throughout the outer territories were going dark one by one. The pattern was always the same. Unknown ships appearing without warning, refusing to respond to telepathic communication, and displaying technology that seemed crude yet devastatingly effective. Korthax moved to the center of the chamber, his form now pulsing with urgent orange light. Counselors, we must consider the possibility that the humans are not myths. The archives speak of their home system being quarantined, after first contact went catastrophically wrong 3,000 cycles ago. What if they've been out there all this time, developing, preparing? Counselor Viridian's form flickered with disbelief. Preparing for what? Revenge for a first contact incident that happened before any of us were formed? That's absurd. And even if these are humans, what threat could they possibly pose? The archives describe them as barely capable of leaving their own system, dependent on chemical propulsion and primitive nuclear power. The archives are 3,000 cycles old, Korthax reminded them. We've advanced significantly in that time. Who's to say they haven't as well? The debate raged on for hours, with some counselors calling for immediate military mobilization, while others insisted this was merely a misunderstanding that could be resolved through proper diplomatic channels. The Zephrani had grown so accustomed to their superiority that the idea of a genuine threat seemed almost incomprehensible. It was Counselor Xanath, keeper of the historical records, who finally provided some clarity. His ancient form, almost transparent with age, projected memories from the deepest archives directly into the collective consciousness. The images were fragmented and distorted, but they showed ships of metal and ceramic, beings in pressure suits working in conditions that would kill most species, and most disturbingly, weapons that relied on kinetic impact rather than energy manipulation. The quarantine was established after the Zephrani exploration vessel, Eternal Light, made first contact with Earth, Xanath explained, his thoughts heavy with the weight of hidden history. The records are deliberately vague, but it seems our ancestors attempted to establish a protectorate over the human homeworld. The humans objected, violently. The Eternal Light barely escaped, and the decision was made to quarantine the entire sector, declaring it a dead zone. High Counselor Xerath's form shifted through several colors, a sign of deep thought. And now they've broken the quarantine. If these truly are humans, they've violated the Treaty of Isolation. We have every right to defend ourselves. The Council quickly reached a consensus. The entire Zephrani fleet would be mobilized to face this threat. Surely whatever advances these humans might have made, they couldn't match the might of an empire that had stood for 10 millennia. As the counselors dispersed to oversee the mobilization, Korthax remained in the chamber, studying the ancient records. Something bothered him about the fragmentary reports from the Eternal Light. The humans hadn't just resisted the Zephrani attempt at establishing a protectorate. They had done something that had terrified the exploration vessel's crew so thoroughly that they had recommended complete isolation. The records mentioned something about the humans' ability to adapt, to take damage and keep functioning, to form strategies that defied logical analysis. But most disturbing was a single line in the captain's final report. They learn from their defeats faster than we learn from our victories. When myths strike back 3 cycles after the emergency council meeting, the Zephrani Empire had assembled the largest fleet in its history above their crystalline homeworld of Zephyros Prime. 500 ships hung in perfect geometric formation, their hulls gleaming with energy shields that could deflect asteroid impacts and plasma storms. Each vessel was a work of art, smooth curves and elegant lines that spoke of technological mastery and aesthetic perfection. High Counselor Xerath stood on the bridge of the flagship, radiant supremacy, his form glowing with confidence. Around him, the cream of Zephrani military leadership coordinated their thoughts through the telepathic network, creating a harmony of strategic planning that had never been defeated in recorded history. Still no response to our telepathic hails, reported the communications officer, his crystalline form flickering with frustration. The unknown vessels continue to advance through our territory, but they're not moving in any recognizable formation. Their approach pattern is chaotic. Xerath dismissed the concern with a pulse of purple light. Chaos is the mark of an inferior mind. When they see our fleet, they'll either surrender or be destroyed. There is no third option. But as the sensor officer began reporting the approaching fleet's composition, the confidence in the bridge began to crack like a crystal under pressure. High Counselor, the enemy ships. They don't match any known design philosophy. Some appear to be converted cargo vessels. Others look like they've been assembled from salvaged parts. I'm reading at least 15 different drive signatures and their weapons. High Counselor, They're using projectile weapons, actual solid projectiles. A wave of incredulous amusement passed through the bridge crew. Projectile weapons? Against their energy shields? It was like throwing stones at a fortress. Then space itself seemed to tear open. The human fleet didn't arrive through hyperspace lanes or subspace corridors like civilized species. They punched through reality itself. Hundreds of ships appearing simultaneously in a display that sent the Zephrani sensors into overload. The tiers in space sparked with exotic energy before sealing themselves, leaving behind a fleet that defied every principle of proper naval organization. At the center was a massive vessel that looked like someone had taken a city and wrapped it in armor plating. It was ugly, asymmetrical, and bristled with weapons ports that seemed to have been added as afterthoughts. Smaller ships surrounded it like a swarm of metal insects, no two exactly alike, as if each had been built by different hands with different ideas of what a warship should be. The Zephrani communication network exploded with confusion and alarm. This wasn't a fleet. It was a collection of individual vessels that happened to be moving in the same direction. How could such a force possibly coordinate in battle? Then the electromagnetic transmission came, broadcast on every frequency simultaneously. It took the Zephrani computers several seconds to decode the primitive signal into something understandable. Attention, Zephrani Empire. This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the United Earth Expeditionary Force. We've come to discuss the terms of your surrender. The bridge of the Radiant Supremacy fell silent. Then Zerath's form blazed with indignation. Surrender? They dare demand our surrender? Open a channel. Let me speak to this Admiral Chen. When the connection established, the main viewing crystal showed something that challenged everything the Zephrani knew about space combat. The human bridge wasn't the clean, organized command center they expected. It was cramped, filled with beings in mismatched uniforms, some sitting at stations held together with what appeared to be adhesive tape. And standing at the center was a figure in a worn uniform, her gray hair pulled back in a simple tie, her weathered face showing what the Zephrani would later learn were called smile lines. Admiral Chen looked directly at the visual sensor, and though she couldn't see Zerath, her gaze seemed to pierce right through him. High Counselor Zerath, I presume. I've read about you in the files we recovered from your mining stations. You've built quite an empire on the assumption that might makes right. Zerath's form pulsed with controlled fury. You dare lecture us on might? Your ships are scrap metal held together by primitive welding. Your weapons are relics from a barbaric age. We are the Zephrani Empire. We have ruled for 10,000 cycles. Chen's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes shifted. 10,000 cycles of unopposed expansion. 10,000 cycles of never facing an enemy who could truly fight back. We've had 3,000 years to prepare for this moment, High Counselor. 3,000 years to study the technology you so graciously demonstrated when you tried to conquer Earth. She gestured to someone off-screen, and new data flooded the Zephrani sensors. Energy readings that shouldn't be possible. Gravitational anomalies surrounding each human ship. And most disturbing of all, what appeared to be miniature artificial intelligences in every single vessel, each one learning and adapting in real time. You see, Chen continued, her voice carrying the weight of centuries of preparation. When your eternal light came to Earth, you made a critical error. You assumed that because we were younger, because we were flesh and blood instead of living crystal, that we were inferior. You didn't realize that our chaos, as you call it, is actually our greatest strength. Zerath began to respond, but Chen cut him off with a raised hand. You're about to order your fleet to attack. You'll start with a concentrated energy barrage, followed by fighter deployment in diamond formation. Your third wave will attempt to flank us using subspace jumps, while your reserves hold back to exploit any weakness. It's textbook Zephrani strategy, unchanged for 5,000 cycles. The High Counselor's form flickered with shock. How could she know their battle plans? Chen's smile was sad rather than triumphant. We've had 3,000 years to study you, to learn from the technology you left behind, to prepare for the day when we'd have to face you again. But here's what you don't understand about humans, High Counselor. We don't want to destroy you. We've seen enough destruction. She paused, letting her words sink in through the translation. But we will not allow you to continue expanding through intimidation and force. The 47 species you've subjugated in the last 1,000 cycles deserve better. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to order your fleet to stand down. You're going to open negotiations for a new galactic charter, one where all species have a voice. Or we're going to demonstrate why the universe's most successful predators evolved on a death world. Zerath's form blazed with every color in the spectrum, a display of pure rage. You dare threaten the Zephrani Empire? You are nothing but myths made flesh. Primitive beings who should have stayed in quarantine. All ships, attack formation Alpha 7. Destroy these arrogant primates. What happened next would be studied by military historians for generations. The Zephrani fleet moved with perfect precision, energy beams lancing out in coordinated patterns that should have overwhelmed any defense. But the human ships didn't try to match their elegance. They scattered like a disturbed school of fish, each ship moving independently, making targeting nearly impossible. Then the projectiles came. Not the primitive solid shots the Zephrani had expected, but relativistic kill vehicles. Chunks of metal accelerated to significant fractions of light speed. The Zephrani shields, designed to deflect energy, couldn't adapt fast enough to stop pure kinetic force. The Eternal Glory, a Zephrani battlecruiser that had served for 2,000 cycles, took a direct hit from what appeared to be a repurposed asteroid mining drill. The projectile punched through its shields, its hull, and its core reactor in less than a second. The ship didn't explode. It simply ceased to exist as anything but an expanding cloud of crystalline fragments. But the humans weren't trying to destroy the fleet. Each strike was surgical, taking out weapon systems and engines while leaving life support intact. It was a display of precision that contradicted everything about their chaotic appearance. Within minutes, half the Zephrani fleet was disabled, floating helplessly in space. The other half held their fire, their captains suddenly unsure of orders that seemed to lead only to defeat. Admiral Chen's image appeared on every screen in the Zephrani fleet simultaneously. High Counselor, I'm transmitting the terms of the new Galactic Charter. You'll find them quite reasonable. Equal representation for all spacefaring species, shared technology development, and most importantly, no more forced protectorates. Zerath's form had dulled to a pale imitation of its former brilliance. Why, he managed to project. Why show mercy when you have the power to destroy us? Chen's expression softened slightly. Because that's what makes us human, High Counselor. We've been the underdog. We've faced extinction more times than you can imagine, both from external threats and from our own mistakes. We learned that survival isn't about being the strongest. It's about being adaptable, about building bridges instead of burning them. She stood up from her command chair, and the casual authority in her bearing was more intimidating than any weapon. The galaxy is changing, High Counselor. The age of empires built on fear is ending. You can be part of building something better, or you can be a cautionary tale in the history books. Your choice. As Zerath considered his options, watching his mighty fleet neutralized by ships that looked like they'd been assembled from spare parts, he realized the terrible truth. The humans hadn't spent 3,000 years building weapons to destroy the Zephrani. They'd spent that time learning to be better than their enemies. The surrender documents were transmitted an hour later. The Zephrani Empire, which had stood unopposed for 10 millennia, signed its own dissolution and reformation as part of the United Galactic Council. It wasn't conquest. It was evolution. And in the historical records, carefully maintained by scholars of all species, a new chapter began. It started with a simple line. They thought humans were just a myth until our battle fleet warped above their planet. What they discovered was that the real myth was their own invincibility. The age of human chaos had begun, and paradoxically, it would bring more order to the galaxy than 10,000 cycles of empire ever had.